Heyo, you're listening to Edge Coach Quip, featuring our very own Edge coaches and community, dropping knowledge nuggets to fuel your day.
Hello, and welcome to Coach Quip. I'm Coach Robyn.
I'm Coach Chris.
This is episode 102. We're in the triple digits, people. Today, we are going to be talking about overtraining, also known as under-recovering, the symptoms, and how to adjust.
I'm excited.
This is one that we were talking before recording, it is wildly under-discussed and yet kind of always present. Yeah. So thinking about overtraining and under-recovering, we first probably should cover what it is, what the symptoms are, and how to avoid it, and how to get out of it, right? Ultimately, that is the goal, is to get out of that cycle. So overtraining and under-recovering always go hand in hand.
Yeah, so let's talk about what they actually are. So overtraining can sometimes be known as chronic fatigue, as burnout, as overstress in athletes. It can happen at any age, at any level of play, and in any sport. What is overtraining specifically? Overtraining occurs when a person exceeds their body's ability to recover from the work that they're putting in, from the stress that they're applying to it. So overtraining can be described as the point where a person maybe experiences a decrease in performance or hits a plateau. And that's one of the ways that we often see it as coaches, is when people seem to be doing what they're supposed to be doing, but hit the effort where they're just kind of stagnant.
It's not adding up.
It's not adding up, exactly. And this is as a result of a failure to appropriately recover, which, to your point, overtraining and under-recovering go hand in hand. And that's how people end up in this sense of either feeling burnt out or not seeing the improvements that they should be seeing within a training cycle.
All right, so how does overtraining happen, right? Types of overtraining, really, there are a lot of them. Big one is lack of variety. So if we have repetitive programming, if we're doing the same hard, like we talked about in episode 101, when we're talking about mental toughness, the same hard workout over and over and over, not really a good thing to do. That monotonous program can absolutely cause overtraining. If you do the exposure to the exact same, especially hard stimulus over and over and over, that lack of variety is going to lead to overtraining. Repetition of the same movement always kind of can burn you out pretty fast, whether that's weightlifting or baseball batting. If we do the same thing over, that plateau means that we basically don't have any type of adaptation of our central nervous system. Our bodies like variety. They like to work hard and rest and recover, and then they can work hard again, but it doesn't do well to do the same thing over and over and over. On the flip side of that, another way though that overtraining happens is overworking, right? Or overexerting. Chronic overwork types of training where an athlete is training with way too high of an intensity or too high of a volume, especially if you're trying to balance it against increased life stress, and not allowing for sufficient recovery time for the body. Fitness only actualizes through the recovery phase. Without recovery, you can throw all your fitness out the window. Also, why coaches say over and over again, we would rather have you 10% undertrained than 1% overtrained. If you overwork, if you overstrain, you don't actually get to use the fitness you put in. We cannot say this enough.
Yeah, this topic is pulling in the greatest hits of all of our previous Coach Quips, of all of these phrases that we're really trying to hammer home. And this is the reason why we say these things, is it really is a really dangerous situation to be overtraining, and even more dangerous to be under-recovering, regardless of what your training plan looks like. So with that, you now know what overtraining is and what it can look like. We're going to talk about how to identify overtraining and how to fix it, most importantly, how to get out of that in our bonus miles. So you will definitely want to stick around. Okay, so now we're going to go through some of the symptoms of overtraining. None of these that we're going to mention alone are necessarily indicators that you are overtraining, but you'll want to, again, take a look at that big picture to try to put some of these things together if you are recognizing that some of these things are aligning for you. We're going to talk about exercise, we're going to talk about the physical, mental, and emotional symptoms, as well as systemic health concerns that you should be looking out for as signs of overtraining.
All right, first up, exercise-related symptoms of overtraining. Again, like Coach Chris said, If you have one of these, it might be just normal stuff. But if you start, thinking, oh, I have that. Oh, I have that too. I have that. This might be a great indication that you're in a state of overtraining. So from an exercise-related standpoint, having a plateau or even a decline in workout performance or progress, despite kind of doing what's written or doing the work. If you are progressing the way that you think you should be progressing from a getting things done standpoint, but it's not really adding up and it hasn't for a while, you might be overtraining. Having a perception of increased exertion during normal or easy workouts, again, a one-off, that's okay. But if you are, doing 50% FTP on your bike and it is feeling like 75 to 80% every single time you get on, we should be having a discussion. Number 3 is excessive sweating or overheating. Or if you can't temperature regulate and all of a sudden you're like, holy moly, what is happening? Especially when you look around and like, that's not normal for you and no one else looks that way.
Why are you looking at me?
Yeah, because this was me today. Right? This was me. But it was also very, very hot. So, but if you start to think, gosh, I have just been sitting still, kind of an inferno, right? Or I've been heating up and like I literally have to be in a sports bra immediately, and normally it takes me 20, 30 minutes to get to that point. These might be symptoms that you're on your way to overtraining. Yeah. Number 4, unusual feelings of heaviness, stiffness, or soreness in muscles. This one's hard because, especially if we're endurance athletes, that's kind of how we're used to feeling all the time. We're talking about overall, maybe not even in your sessions. If when you get up out of a chair, you just feel very, very, very heavy, not fluid. Those are all signs that you're not recovering properly and that your body is still trying to repair.
Yeah, if it's taking you an extra long time to warm up or you never feel like you're getting past that point of warming up, that's an indication.
All right, next is a lack of feeling refreshed after regular or that easy effort. These easy efforts, I think, are actually a better indicator of overtraining and under recovery than anything else, because when they start to lose their magic of making you feel better, that's a big sign that you're going into the red. Take note of how quickly you're doing them, if you are in fact doing them as that easy AF, we have an episode on that too, type of range, but it's leaving a really big mark, then we need to start looking at how your overall training load is setting in. And next is recurrent injuries. So whether it's muscle sprains, tendonitis, stress fractures, chronic joint pain, our bodies, especially upon first injury of a new area, are really good at sending signals of like, yo, you're doing too much, right? So when we get that injury, and especially if it's a recurrent injury, that is going to be an indicator of overtraining. Remember, it can also just be that you're not doing enough variety too, right? So it doesn't mean, oh, I'm not a runner. It means, no, we need to be doing more strength training in a normal training cycle that is going to complement you better. A decline in enthusiasm for exercise, skipping or quitting workouts. I think in general, coming out of the last 3.5 years, our threshold for dealing with any type of stress, whether it's work, life, emotional, workout, training, racing, any of those things, it's actually much less because our baseline used to be pretty low and now it's much higher, which means the ceiling stays the same, but our threshold for hitting that ceiling is much closer than it used to be, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means me as athletes, as people training next to us, our training friends, as coaches, we need to kind of realize that when we start to see that enthusiasm dip, you need to make a change, right? And that is going to help you both physically and mentally. And then just a really small thing that I always think about when we started Edge is if you go up a flight of stairs repeatedly, or if you're going a little incline and you are just taxed repeatedly, right? It's getting harder and harder to get up your flight of stairs into your condo. Or if you don't normally have your arms fall asleep when you're sleeping, especially if you're a tummy sleeper or a side sleeper and that's happening, also signs that you might be overtraining because your body literally is not able to deliver oxygen to areas in periods of movement or rest. And that is something that we want to listen to.
That was a good one for me. That I heard that and I was like, wait a second.
Yeah, actually a fun story on that is when we first came up with the idea of Edge, we did not have very much dedicated to recovery. This was now many moons ago. And we were training for, I think, 100K. and we have 3 flights of stairs in our condo, a lot of stairs. You got to go vertical, right? We brought the recovery tools into our house because, we were thinking, hey, we might as well try them out, right? We were in build out phase, and we had e-stim, laser, and boots. And we were noticing that we used them on our top floor. And we were noticing that as our mileage was increasing, we were actually feeling better going up these flights of stairs. We weren't getting to the top with just like total fatigue and burn. And we're like, are we turning into robots? And then we're like, no, oh my God, the recovery is real, right? Because we had never integrated, this is like 12 years ago, like we had never integrated this stuff into our training. And by doing that consistently, like 3 to 4 days a week, even for 30 minutes, we were able to offset some of those increased training loads and really help our body repair at an accelerated rate to the point where we felt good going upstairs.
Yeah, and that speaks to the reason why Edge is amazing and why
just over here to Chris's other side is a recovery lounge.
Why we need to be focusing on that and how overtraining and under-recovering go hand in hand. All right, so now we're going to go through a couple of the physical, mental, and emotional signs that you might be overtraining. Starting off with persistent feelings of fatigue, exhaustion, or low energy throughout the day. So our workouts, even the tough workouts, oftentimes give us energy later on. If we wake up and do a run, even a hard run in the morning, it's common to have increased energy throughout the day because, one, you've already got the hard work out of the way, right? There's something about that mental toughness that happens waking up in the morning, doing a hard thing before breakfast, and then going on with your day. But if you are finding that you are unable to maintain your energy throughout the day, it might be a sign that you are overtraining, or specifically here, probably under-recovering or under-sleeping. The next would be a decline in motivation or feelings of self-confidence. If you are starting to notice a lot more intrusive or negative thoughts, that can be a sign of overtraining. And I think this is where in the first part we mentioned how overtraining is often called chronic fatigue or burnout, right? A lot of the things that we're talking about, I see athletes call like, oh, I'm just burnt out from running right now, not recognizing that it actually also might be that they are overtraining. And
Totally.
I think sometimes we call it burnout so that we don't have to stop or cut back on the activities that we love, when really that's probably the best thing for us. So another one would be a lack of enjoyment, having your favorite hobbies or interests no longer seem interesting to you, or any other signs of depression around that area. We mentioned that a lot of these symptoms and signs can be indicators of different sorts of illnesses like depression, right? But also that in the big picture in your training, this might be an indicator of under-recovering and overtraining. Next up will be unusual moods or emotions for you, being agitated, feeling angry, feeling confused or irritable or depressed. If that is not your usual state, that's important to say, I think.
And as coaches, we actually look for this one. We joke about the taper tantrum because sometimes we get all that wrapped up into those 2 weeks before race day.
Yeah.
But if that stuff is occurring as we're building through a season, like if one of my athletes would start to have those symptoms now, I'd be like, what is up? This is not supposed to be happening at this stage.
So new problems with sleep would be another one, having some new insomnia or poor sleep quality. Ideally, if we have a well-structured training plan, we're able to exert ourselves so that we want that sleep and recovery.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when we are, I think people in marathon training are often talking about doing that long run and then taking a nice nap or sleeping really well that night going into the next day. We sort of expect that we would have better sleep as we are exerting ourselves more. But it gets to a point where if you are, if it's hammer time every single day, that could actually interrupt your sleep, which interrupts your ability to recover and repair yourself. So that would be a sign of overtraining as well. And then finally in this area, problems with concentration or performance outside of training, including at work or in school. If you're noticing that your lack of focus is starting to drift into other areas, it might be a sign of overtraining.
And it's so interesting. Our bodies do that because if they are trying to recover and they're not getting a chance to recover, they're actually shutting down other processes so that we can try to deal in a reduced capacity with life. And, you know, it's not a weakness. It's a sign that something else is going on.
Yeah, and also just an indicator that, you know, you can't compartmentalize your training separate from your work life or your family life or school life. That all of this sort of bleeds over. So again, if you are really stressed at work, you're going to see an impact in your training and how you feel in your training sessions. And if you are really overdoing it in the training area, you might see negative impacts in your family life, in your work relationships, or at school.
All right, next up is a big one. It's a serious one, which is systemic health concerns of overtraining. So when we go way down the rabbit hole, let's say that we haven't listened to this amazing podcast, we're still training at the same intensity, nothing's changed, you are going to start to see some health indicators that would flag you as overtraining. So one is going to be a sickly appearance, changes in skin, hair, nails. So we have like acne or really brittle nails or hair loss. Those can also all be indicators of hormonal changes that are caused by overtraining that we want to pay attention to. So if there is a change and you're like, why is all of this hair in the drain? Start to check the boxes and put them together that something else might be going on. Next is going to be an increase in resting heart rate and resting blood pressure. I know we don't always have access to blood pressure, but you know, a lot of times like CVS or Walgreens will have those. So if you're curious, you can always drop by. Big things on that is going to be data points. So taking it and then taking it kind of same time of day, you know, every other week, whatever that is. Most of our wearables do have some type of a heart rate tracker. You don't necessarily have to sleep with your watch though. You can just sit quietly with it for 2 to 5 minutes and get an average. And that is going to give you a baseline so that you can see where it changes. I know that Garmin also does respiration rate, which I think is really helpful. And when you're going through periods of stress, I mean, a little too chatty for me, but it'll tell me, you know, like chill out, your respiration rate is high. And it's not talking about breathing respiration, it's talking about at-rest respiration, right? Next is going to be unplanned or undesired weight loss or weight gain or disordered eating. This is a big one. If we are thrown off or we are super stressed or our body isn't recovering the right way, it might shut down your hunger cues or it might ramp them up in a desperate attempt to try to repair. If you are noticing that these things are happening when past seasons that hasn't happened, especially important, that is going to be a really great indicator that you have some type of health related issue related to overtraining. Reproductive issues like a decrease in libido, right? And changing in menstruation, including having it your period become more irregular or maybe you even have it stop. That's a great sign, big sign, right? That you have something that is going on that hasn't gone on before that we need to address. It doesn't mean that you're not a runner and you can't do A, B, and C. It just means we need to do things a little bit differently. And then finally, I feel like we see this one a lot. Repeated bouts of illness. So whether you have colds a ton, you've gotten the flu 3 times, you have upper respiratory tract infections, you have, you know, sinus infections repeatedly, those are really big things that when we start to see it happen like once a month, when other people around us aren't catching those things, that's a great sign that you should be considering your training and or recovery levels.
All right, so we do want to give a note here, because a lot of the signs of overtraining can actually mimic those of other health conditions. It's really important to take a holistic approach here. Look at the big picture of your training. Maybe go through this list and see which of these are actually apply to you. And you know, if it doesn't make sense that it would be an overtraining issue, you definitely want to work with healthcare providers, including your general practitioner, maybe a sports practitioner, and or a dietitian, to figure out the big picture of what might be going on for you.
All right. Yeah. How to recover from overtraining. First up, rest, right? Overtraining is also under recovering, so focus on recovery. Lucky for you, we have an entire lounge with pugs for exactly that. It might be best to actually stop training for a period of time, maybe as much as a week, and really hit that reset. This is why pro athletes take big breaks after their main events. It's for exactly this reason. You can also shift to active recovery workouts. So instead of running, you're swimming or aqua jogging. Many athletes will actually see improvements by just reducing their training by 50 to 80%, right? So if you even take a week down to 50%, that next week, a lot of these symptoms can actually drop off.
Yeah, and that might be a great way to do it for those folks who feel so attached to doing a workout every single day, right? And those are often the ones that we see experience the sort of symptoms of burnout or overtraining because they're not allowing themselves to have that rest day. But even backing off, so say, the consistency of a workout every day for the mental health benefits, for example, is really important to you. Taking that 5-mile run down to 2 to 3 miles might actually accomplish that in sort of backing off and easing up the load that you're putting on your body. That's a great one. All right, so the second thing would be to sleep. Sleep is our number one recovery tool, and we all need more sleep. I think it's estimated that most Americans fall short of that sort of 7 to 9 hours of sleep that they say adults should be getting. And I know that the numbers vary for different populations and different people. You'll often hear people say, I can get by fine on 5 hours of sleep. And maybe that's true until it's not. and this is one that can accumulate over time and then hit you like a ton of bricks when it actually starts to set in. So sleep. Our sleep needs increase when you are putting out big efforts. And when you are recovering from overtraining, this is a great tool to get past the symptoms of overtraining and really boost that amount of recovery.
I loved in episode 91, which I know is one of your favorites, was where we went roundtable and asked all of the coaches for their favorite 5-minute tips to just becoming a healthier person. And Coach Diarmid gave the 5-minute suggestion of just adding 5 minutes to your sleep every night until you get to a place where you just feel a lot better. I mean, it's 5 minutes. It's 5 minutes. Maybe those 5 minutes save you from overtraining.
Yeah, it might be. And you can look for a future episode about sleep coming up because this is so important.
Next up is going to be fuel. So, by the way, you're going to need to go back to episode 99 with Coach J-Ro because she is going to be talking about this, and we've gotten a ton of feedback on that episode. It's way more information than we would ever be able to go over. And she's a true professional. So making sure that you have enough nutrition available for recovery. This is super important to be getting it in for the episode 99, 30 minutes within finishing. As she puts it, when you finish, your body, your muscles, your tendons, your ligaments, your bones are hungry. They are ready to uptake like giant sponges, carbs and proteins going in within 30 minutes of being done.
And if you are consistently missing that refueling after workouts and or your overall nutrition is poor, I mean, this is going to be a huge one. And just by fixing what's on your plate, you can really help yourself climb out of an overtraining and under recovering hole.
As my coach used to say to me, do you want to rebuild your muscles with potato chips? The answer is no. Even though I like potato chips, it shouldn't be the base.
Exactly.
Along with fueling, making sure that you are hydrating like we are right now. Yep, we are holding up bottles. For those not watching on YouTube, most of us are falling short of our water intake. The new recommendations updated in 22 by the Mayo Clinic, this was Coach Chris's find, and frankly, I found it really helpful, which was 11.5 cups per day for women and 15.5 cups per day for men. And after exercising more than an hour, you're going to add another 12 to 16 ounces per 15 minutes is recommended. I always say if you have a handheld, you better be draining that at least a couple times an hour, especially if it's hot.
Yeah, and I know even people who think that they are good on their water intake are falling short in this area. It is tough if you don't start early and often to keep your numbers up. The last thing you want to do is be like me and then realize at 7 o'clock at night that you're behind on your water and then slam a bunch before bed to try to
sleep.
get
And then you're messing up your sleep.
And the cycle continues. All right, so the next way that you can help climb out of an overtraining hole is to treat and assess whatever is going on in terms of injuries and illnesses before you start to train again. So if you find yourself in that sort of overtraining condition or under recovering, and you're having those injuries pop up, I mean, you mentioned things like getting sick all the time, having respiratory illness, or catching colds or flus, but it can also be things like muscle strains or pains in your leg. Okay, one day your hamstring hurts, and then it's your calf, and then you have a foot problem, right? If you're starting to see those injuries pop up, we need to make sure that all of those are clear before you really start to get back to your training. So if the goal is to be able to do our sports long term, then we need to make sure that we are in a healthy condition enough to continue our training. And it only makes sense to address those injuries that are popping up, or make sure that we're fully over our illness before we get back to our training. That means that you might need to modify your training schedule. You might need to modify workouts or make adaptations to exercises. And listen, that is okay. You should do that. One of the ways, again, of overtraining is repetition, by doing the same thing over and over and over again. So in fact, making those adaptations and changes and variety is actually a really, really good thing for you in terms of both treating injuries and your overall training and health and wellness as being a lifelong athlete. And then use your tools. I think this is an important one. Our treatments for injuries, air quotes around treatments there, can be our recovery modalities.
Yep.
So we really should be using the tools that we have at hand. If you can do a cold plunge or compression sleeves or massage, active recovery, foam rollers, anything that you have, those should be implemented into your training. If they're not already, being in a burned out or overtrained state is the perfect time to implement some of these in a long-lasting way, not just as a Band-Aid to get you back to the old things that you were doing.
So Coach Bennett, who's the global head coach for all of Nike Run Club, he always does this trick that I think of many times when it comes to recovery. I'm going to come full circle in a second. During a speed run, let's say they have 10 400s. On the first 400, he is having everybody walk, put their hands on their head, open up their lungs, right? Relax their shoulders and get in big, deep breaths to lower that heart rate. His whole thing is, you're going to do this now so that when you get to rep 5, 6, 7, 8, and you are tired, your body already knows what to do, right? It just becomes this motor memory, hands on the head, big, deep breaths, get the heart rate down. I think of the same thing with recovery modalities. You want to integrate these when you are, just a couple weeks in, not 3/4 of the way in and feeling terrible, because then your body is going to know that it can do a certain amount of work because it knows the recovery that it's going to be getting before you get to the stage where you really, really, really need it.
Yeah, this is a great one. If we make this part of our system and keeping it simple, like our last episode, make that routine and implementing these when we feel good, it helps us feel better for longer, as opposed to doing it as something that almost seems like punishment. When we're injured, it is or overtrained or just feeling like garbage, it's a horrible time, right? If you have any part of your identity wrapped up in being an athlete or in the activity or event that you're doing, to be unable to do that at the same level that you did before or in a way that feels good, feels like punishment.
Yeah.
And then I think we start to see the recovery modalities or the extra sleep as punishment, as opposed to something, as opposed to a tool that can really help us progress in our training.
Lucky for you, for everyone. If you're not a member at Edge, we also have summer hours going on right now where during the afternoons, we have 30% off of recovery passes. So you can just come in here in the afternoon and go gangbusters and have some really fresh legs and hopefully recover and offset overtraining. Next up is going to be rethinking, right? This is how we dig ourselves out of that overtraining phase. Look at your overall training program and seek more balance. Chances are, I know when I write my own programming, I go back and reflect and I'm like, well, I did that wrong, right? Have that type of objective view so that you are able to make changes and just accept that something was not in balance. So seek for what can become more balanced. And also rethinking your goals and your approach. Like maybe you're trying to qualify for Boston and you gave yourself a 1-year runway. Maybe it needs to be 2-3 years in order to get it done safely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think looking at what you have, you can't expect different results by doing the same thing. So going right back into what got you to that overtrained state is not going to be the right answer. I think that not enough people give respect to cross training.
I agree with you.
And by switching up our activities and getting the benefits from not doing that repetitive movement. If we are only running and we're running every day or 5 days a week, and we're not doing strength training or cycling or swimming or elliptical machine or anything else that is slightly varies the movement, we are going to be much more prone to that overuse and overtraining state. But we can still get the fitness benefits from switched activities. And so it's important to look at some of your options to take the pressure off there. All right, our final tip for digging out of an overtraining hole is to reintroduce your training when you are ready with a different approach. So again, switching it up a little bit, what got you to this phase of overtraining or under-recovering, so you have to rethink, look at the big picture, and make those adjustments. Don't be afraid to do different things. Consider a new event or sport. This was one of the tips that you had.
You gotta keep it fresh. Like, I had an athlete who got pretty burned out on running ultras. I mean, he was having some pretty significant overtraining cues, and in the past, in his 20s, he didn't have them, and in his 30s and early 40s, he definitely did. So guess what? He's doing mountain biking this year, and he is loving it. Upside is that he's building an incredible aerobic engine that he'll be able to use in any sport that he is wanting to do, but he has none of the signs of overtraining that he had before.
Yeah, so it can be helpful to work with a coach to get an individualized plan and a specific approach that suits your life as well. As we're reintroducing things, in thinking about the rethinking tip that you just gave, as our life conditions change, we also need to change our approach as well. So if we do have that increased stress in other areas, or our time constraints become different.
Yeah.
A lot of folks who do experience overtraining are training for a big goal, but suddenly have less time to do it, which ends up, back to my hammer time. We're trying to slam in a huge amount of workout into a small amount of time, and that's not always the best approach. Working with a coach can be a great way to keep you on track and to give you some guardrails to make sure that you are implementing healthy approaches to your recovery, which can help offset that overtraining.
All right, to recap, this was a lot. How does overtraining happen? Really, honestly, it's lack of variety and overwork or lack of recovery.
And it's important that you look for the signs. So check back at our big list of our exercise symptoms, as well as physical, mental, and emotional systems, and the larger systemic health symptoms that might indicate that you are suffering from overtraining or under recovery.
And remember, there's ultimately a way out, right? So if you have all these things, don't be freaking out. Take a breath, relax. There are tips to get out, and we've seen plenty of athletes come through the other side. Number 1, rest. Take some time off of your sport or cut your volume back.
Number 2 is to get adequate sleep. This is your number 1 recovery modality. Sleep, sleep, sleep.
Number 3, fuel. That means appropriate nutrition going in as well as hydration so that your body can repair itself.
Number 4, treat any symptoms or illnesses that you have before you restart.
Number 5, rethink your goals and your plan. You might need to have a longer runway, and ultimately your goal is to stay as healthy for as long as possible.
And number 6, restart slowly. If you do take that time off to deal with the condition of overtraining and under recovery, and you are ready to get back to it, don't go right back to what you were doing. Start slowly, add variety to your training, and work your way back up.
You know who could help with that? A coach. So if you're interested in edge coaching, just shoot us a note or DM us and we can get you hooked up with how that works.
Thanks for listening to Coach Quip. Original music performed by Mend. Follow us online on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Edge Athlete Lounge. Our podcast lives in the blog section of our website. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast, and you can check out the show notes for additional ways to contact us. Ready, set, onward we go.